Hi, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
As you'll soon discover, I am not an engineer. I am the person that brings together legislation, coalitions, and money to make all of this happen. So that's sort of what I'm going to be talking about today is our new Just Transition program. Many of you are struggling with the same thing, what to do with existing buildings. And this is one of our approaches. So I'm going to talk to you about that today. You've seen this chart a million times. This is what everyone's chart looks like in terms of GHG emissions. All these emissions in transportation, buildings not so much, apparently. Only 18% in residential and 14% in commercial. But what we actually know is that these GHG estimates are underestimated by at least 1,000% for our buildings and 40% if you look at the whole city because of methane. The estimates do not take into account methane leaks along the entire pipeline. And so we can see that our estimates are at least 5 times under where they should be. If you look here, you'll see that this is what we're saying buildings are, is 32%. But if we consider methane leaks along the way, it's 84% of our emissions. This is why we have a firm focus on buildings. The other reason is because we don't control all the transportation decisions that are made in the town. We control land use approvals, but we can't control who takes a bus. We don't even control the buses. They're controlled by the local transit agency or BART. We don't control what cars people buy, et cetera. But we do control what happens in new buildings. So this is where we had our original focus was on new buildings. And you know we introduced this gas prohibition. We talked about it yesterday. Just a couple of facts about it. It prohibits internal gas piping in all new buildings. Nothing on the street level, doesn't decommission any of the gas infrastructure. And there are 2 exceptions in cases of, this should say, physical infeasibility or public interest exemption. We put this last part in because the way our code worked was you had to become all electric as the California Energy Commission created a pathway for an all electric building. It would have been illogical for us to say, okay, you high-rise residential, you have to be all electric. And then they get there for their Title 21 and they're told, sorry, there's no way to get approval. So we were focused on moving with the CEC. So we started with low-rise residential. They went to high-rise residential. They've gone to some commercial. I don't know what's happened in the entire universe, but we're assuming there's going to be some use they're not going to regulate. And if they don't regulate it, we don't regulate it. I can't even imagine what this thing is. But that's what this is for. Or if someone said to us, this hospital must have natural gas, it's a public interest exemption. We've gotten no requests for a public interest exemption during the course of this. And we have not gotten any requests for it being physically infeasible either. So, but you know what? That's only part of the battle, because our new units under our regional housing standards are going to be 8,900, and actually I think we're going to hit more like 12,000. But what do we have right now? We have 50,000 total units in Berkeley. So the scale of the problem with existing buildings is so much bigger that this is what we've turned to next. Here's an estimate of the cost of electrifying our existing buildings just in Berkeley, a small town. Between $700 million with no solar just for economy appliances, up to $1.4 billion if we do solar and mid-level and tier improvements as well as mid-level appliances. So we're looking at a huge price tag. How do we do this? How do we even make a small dent into this kind of huge problem? We started with I have to go back one, I think. There we go. We started with this very small pilot that was only $600,000, which basically, this came out of my office, tried to pilot some approaches to electrification. One, we have a Resilient Home retrofit program that runs through a group called Rebuilding Together in Berkeley that helps low-income homeowners, and we're working with low-income apartment owners, affordable housing developers that still own the building. So this has been a very important approach of ours, including, I should mention, the Northern California Land Trust, which was our first project. We also included aspects so that we could look broadly at all parts of electrification for electric mobility and a community engagement pilot. I'm not going to talk about those last very much. What's really important in all of this is the amazing power, if it'll go forward, of, I think I went too far again. Hold on a second. Yes, I did. I need to go back. There we go. And we're going to go forward one more time. Okay. The really amazing power of leveraging. This is what we're trying to do and show with this small pilot. was how we could leverage other sources of funding. So for example, we got $50,000 for this land use project, that land trust project on 10th Street in Berkeley. We're leveraging local, regional, state, and federal programs for these projects. So the leveraging is really important. We also, as I mentioned, let's see if I can stand here a little bit more. We have the Waterside Workshop Electric Access Pilot, which trains youth in how to fix up and maintain electric bikes, and also gives low-income residents e-bikes. So that was our pilot for bicycling, electric bicycling. And then we have, as I mentioned, you'll see the youth here. This is it's a tiny program, but it makes me so happy. I can't even tell you. This is the future. This is what we need to be focused on. We also have the community engagement pilot, which is more about talking to low-income communities and their organizations about what are we trying to do. And our ecology center is doing this, and it also got leveraged. But going back to the buildings, in the midst of all of this planning and thinking about how we wanted to approach this, of course, we had COVID. But then we also had the American Rescue Plan. And the important thing about the American Rescue Plan is that it allows flexible spending by cities. I told Sean already, I spent hours arguing with my city manager, said, no, when we get the ARPA money, it has to go back to exactly what we were doing before. And I'm like, no. I called the Treasury Department in DC. Look at these criteria: advance equity and support underserved communities. ARPA was tied to that. It was an explicit criteria. I don't want you to give this money back to police overtime. I want you to give this money to this, equity and underserved communities. And one of those things is building electrification. At the same time we were having that argument, labor stepped in. And they have created an entire set. I know there's somebody here from Rising Sun. Still here? Yep. Where'd they go? Where is she?
Oh, she's on a meeting.
Ah, okay. Hi. Hi out there, thank you. Labor stepped in with two really important things. The California Workforce Development Board had a $9 million grant for workforce development for a just recovery. And the Bay Area-based Rising Sun had $600,000 for building decarb. It did not pay any money for actually doing anything with buildings, but it convened all these cities to start talking about how we're going to do this. So it was a really critical piece of us being able to move ahead. So with all that, with the ARPA money coming in and this work being done by labor.
I think you have to point it this way.
I have to point it this way? That's what I'm doing wrong. Thank you. So we were able to bridge this gap and really create a blue-green alliance through this work of labor. And I think that was the biggest breakthrough for us and got us a lot of support for our Just Transition program. This was funded in May of 2022 using the ARPA funding. It was a coalition of labor, climate, housing justice groups. You can see a big swath of the community was involved in this process. I'm going to point that way. So what did it do? It had several different goals. One, the goal was obviously to reduce emissions. I think even more important is number two, what we were talking about yesterday, the whole house approach, improve occupant health and comfort, along with energy affordability and reducing emissions. Advancing economic opportunities for electrification contracts. We're working with several groups that employ youth people and other people of color to do this work in our communities. And in fact, the Just Transition Fund, you must use an organized labor group. It doesn't have to be a union, but it has to be a group that works at organizing labor and offering them apprenticeships and a series of other labor rights I'm going to show you in a second. We also encourage building owners to participate by making these rebates to the contractors. I'm a homeowner, a low-income homeowner. My water heater breaks. Someone says, well, great, in 2 years you'll get a rebate from the federal government. This is not going to work. I can't wait 2 years to get this money. We give the money to the contractors. You're out of it. You don't have to do a thing. They just come and do it for you. So here's some of the minimum labor standards. Prevailing wage requirements. Worker skill training is mandated. Healthcare and pension benefits. Targeted hiring requirement of disadvantaged workers, particularly of our MC3 pre-apprenticeship programs. And this just reflects our ongoing work in Berkeley on labor standards. I'm very proud of the Fair Workweek ordinance, which I just passed last year, again, over the objections of our city manager, which says that part-time workers are offered more hours before you hire more part-timers. And if you cancel their schedule with less than 24 hours notice, you pay them anyway. Because that person's got 4 jobs to keep their family afloat. And the day you cancel their assignment is the day they don't eat. So we are really proud of this work that we do in Berkeley. Part of that is something we just passed called the Hard Hat Ordinance, which requires those same labor standards, worker skills, and healthcare, not the pension part, benefits for anybody on construction projects in Berkeley over a certain size. This is going into effect in January. So we've expanded on what we did in this tiny little fund to say we're going to do that for all construction projects. So these are just, I'm not going to go over these details. These are details of some of the ways that we do things. We have management reporting requirements. We have direct client and partner services. And there's a big impact beyond Berkeley, which I'm really proud of. We're getting many cities across the state asking, how did you do this? The California Workers Training Institute is using us as a model of saying, how do we engage low-income workers and low-income residents and deal with the climate all at the same time? And this is how we do it. So we're working with all these different partners on figuring out how to execute similar programs and what kind of outreach methodologies are effective to communities. It's really tough getting a hold of those low-income homeowners sometimes. They're not available, they're working, they have no idea what you're talking about. How do we do that effectively? How do we aggregate work sites? This is really important to labor. They don't want to go in and do one person's house. They want an organization like our Rebuilding Together, which says, here are 25 houses. You get all 25. Then they're going to do it. They're not going to just go do my water heater, but they will do 25 houses. And information about the benefits of the program. Possible next steps, and I don't know where we're going to be at this. We have kind of a, I would say, grumpy electorate at the moment who's not voting for all of our tax measures. For the first time, they turned down a bond last year, and we're all like, that never happens in Berkeley. They always vote for us. Anyway, we're going to try a citizens ballot initiative to tax large natural gas users. They did that, I believe, in Portland. I tried something earlier. I should have said between the time when we had the gas ban and we started on this just transition work, I tried to pass a ballot measure that was a big failure, which was to tax natural gas more than electricity on our utility users tax. And it did not work. A, because PG&E did not have the data. They were completely, we're just trying to say to voters, trust us, we think natural gas is about X times electricity. You may use this. We did not have any real data. And people didn't know what electrification was yet. This was in 2020. And they were all like, what are you talking, what's a heat pump? I don't know what you're talking about. So the work you're all doing is making this possible. But anyway, I'm now moving on to something different, which is to tax large gas users. We think that we could get about $4 to $17 million a year. And if we leverage this properly, we think that we could get about 25% of our low-rise stock completely electrified and made whole home safe. So that's where we're going with that. Also, I don't know how many of you are aware of what's known as the 218 process. This is where you ask taxpayers in your community. We've assessed the cost of this service to you, garbage or water. And here is a proposal for how much we're going to charge you for that thing. It doesn't go on the ballot. You get a little postcard that says, your garbage rates will be going up by 50% unless you turn this back in. And that 218 process is very passive. I'm looking at trying to roll in the actual cost of carbon into what we do. We have never approached this issue. We have right now we've added to our garbage rates, this is in our last 218, the cost, the impact of heavy garbage trucks on the roads as part of our road costs, because that's an externality. I'd like to do the same thing with carbon, but this is a kind of out there idea. I don't know if this will ever fly, because again, our voters are a little unhappy with us at the moment. So that's what we've been up to in Berkeley. It's been kind of a wild ride, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Questions?
So I want.
Yeah, Sean.
I want to know so you went from a pilot in which you were making sort of hard hat rules that you were listing off all the benefits that would go to that was on a pilot. Tell me how that was that was successful enough for you to say this should be for everywhere? Can you tell a little bit, like, how did you
Yeah.
guys determine, like, oh, that worked? That was a good
Yeah,
idea.
well, there's 3 programs. So there was the pilot, the 600,000, where we started with some labor rules, and these 2 organizations, Rebuilding Together and the multifamily people. Then we, at the same time, then ARPA happened, and we said we could expand this pilot, and we want to focus only on buildings. The pilot had buildings, transportation, education. We're like, no, buildings, 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 because of the numbers I showed. So we expanded that and included all these labor standards. In the meantime, the trades came to us and said, look, the state is arguing back and forth about what kind of labor standards they should have. The carpenters want just prevailing wage. Most of the rest of us want apprenticeships and health care. Those are the most important things to low-income communities. We are not the primes. The carpenters are the primes usually on these projects. They're the wealthier people, right? And then you have all these trades below them. And they're like, no, we don't agree with these guys. We want more labor rights. And so they're arguing about that at the state level, and we're like, we're going to do it locally. And that's what we've done.
Right, as you've done so many times.
Yeah, that's why Berkeley leads the way, I think. I really think local government is where it's at in terms of piloting some of these ideas. So, yeah, you had a question?
Can we clone you and put you in lots of cities?
Yeah.
Claire yesterday talked about what I call neighborhood degasification. Are you all exploring anything in that arena?
We might if we do the large tax that I talked about in the prior slide of commercial interest, we might be able to approach that. That's really being done through our East Bay Community Energy, which is, I'm on the board, or I was last year. The East Bay Community Energy is doing this for us in the neighborhoods you heard about yesterday. I think I mentioned to a couple of you, one of the big problems with Berkeley is we have no poverty census tracts. We have lots of poor people. They're spread out all over the city, and you probably have the same thing in some of these cities in the peninsula. Palo Alto, you have poor people. Nobody recognizes them. They don't exist. So when we go to get money from places like EBCE, they're like, yeah, you're not poor. We're giving it to Oakland, which is fine. Oakland needs it too. But we're completely disadvantaged by that. Same thing with homelessness funding. You guys aren't poor. But we have a lot of poverty. So we're trying to look at whether we can use that ballot measure. But again, EBCE is piloting that in Oakland. Yes?
What types of houses has been, retrofitted, renovated by the program so far?
Yeah.
Is it like specific types, sizes? Is it spread out through the city, or is it specific neighborhoods? I'm just curious about how you...
We just started. So the small pilot, we did a land trust building in South Berkeley, which is a very poor area. The building was owned by a church, completely falling apart. They came in and redid the entire building using the pilot fund, our land trust did. And then the Rotary, which I'm a member of, gave them an electric vehicle charging station. So they have a shared car for these 8 apartments, which I think is really cool. So I should put that on these leverage slides. I forgot about that. But so we've only done 1 building. And then we did the Just Transition program, which came in June of 22, and we had to put out an RFP. And it's only now that we finally have contractors. So we have not done any other buildings yet. But they're going to be looking mainly at, again, low-income homeowners, single-family low-rise, and affordable housing buildings. Yeah, go ahead. So you had another question?
Yeah, to follow up on that. Is there going to be someone else in the program that will be transitioning with the homeowner and the program? Just wondering if there's going to be a translator between that, to let us know what's happening. And
Yes. That's where this group Rebuilding Together comes in. So for years, they've worked in our community. They're like Habitat, but they belong to Berkeley. They've worked in our community to provide ramps for disabled people, insulation. They have done a lot of that work, so they're known, and now they're going to be doing this work for the single-family homes. But again, over 65% of our residents are tenants, so we don't have as many homeowners as a lot of places. Yeah.
So I guess 2 comments, but I guess maybe one of them is a question. So on that proposed large gas user tax, would that include school districts and special districts as well, or is that targeting commercial property owners? When you say large gas users?
It's commercial only.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. And yeah, I'm really curious what this environment's going to look like with bonds and really just asking voters to tax themselves to solve problems, because we just had a big school bond fail a few years ago for the first time in like 30 years at the state level. So I'm just fascinated by this 218 process that you kind of outlined here, because I think that might be a way to get around what seems to be an environment going into next year where voters are going to be on the back end of a recession, about a year and a half into a recession, even though we're not saying that out loud. And then last comment on the carpenters, because they broke from AFL-CIO, so they have had like a bit of a civil war going on right now with the larger trades. That's showing up everywhere, including Sacramento.
Yeah, I would say the big thing for me on these tax measures is equity, equity, equity. Because last year, our bond, it was a bond for affordable housing and infrastructure. It was a bond rather than a parcel tax. And when you do a parcel tax, you can charge commercial interests more. So our library parcel tax, businesses pay 1.5 times what homeowners do. That's a selling strategy. I was not in the group of 4 on the council that decided on this bond, and I'm really fixed on this parcel tax. People are very concerned with equity, and that equity is not just low-income people, it's middle-class homeowners who are like, why am I paying everything? Where are the companies? What are they paying? What are developers paying? What are big businesses paying? So that's kind of a thematic thing on money, I think. Yeah.
I'm actually very curious about kind of this Prop 218 process that you're referring to. As a municipal utility, we have to comply with the 218 requirements. But is that from the city side, or is that from the utility side to meet the?
Well, because you have a public utility, you do it through your utility. Our utilities also have to do it, but we charge for garbage, for example. Trash collection is a municipal obligation, and as I said, we were able to put in what I consider an environmental cost, damage to roads, as part of the 218.
I see. Do you know that that's been done anywhere?
I think we were the first to have done that. Yeah.
What about the ballot measure? Like, to have some sort of a ballot initiative to add a carbon tax or some sort of a carbon fund. Do you know if that's been done anywhere?
No, and that was our gas tax. We tried to tax gas to push people to electrification, and it didn't work. I don't know anyone else that's successfully done that.
If it helps to maybe do some sort of a citywide survey to get the temperature before you put the ballot out.
Yeah. Well, interesting, Albany, which is a tiny city next to us, 15,000 people, we were working with them, and theirs passed. So they obviously did something better in their marketing and explaining it. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
Really quickly, sorry to hog the time here, but we have an embodied carbon team, and it sounds like you might be moving towards local building performance standards that might be taken into account. Embodied carbon, is that something you kind of see moving forward?
Yeah, I have a deconstruction ordinance in the works. It says, it's great when we build new housing, but when we tear down something old, there's carbon in there. And please don't take my fireplace and chop it in little bits and say, I use that as landfill, so that's recycling. Recognize the carbon impact, build the housing on top of what's already there, don't destroy what we have. And that's both a neighborhood value and a value for the environment. So we are working on that, yeah.
For the trades that are going into, because you're building your apprenticeship program, kind of building that local contractors workforce, are you working with, I guess, the neighboring cities? Because I see it will be kind of like a regional impact versus you're getting all the contractors that specifically living in Berkeley.
Yeah. We're working with the Construction Workers Trade Institute, which is doing a training program for apprenticeships throughout. And they are one of the people that bid on the Just Transition Fund. So they will have regional people. When I say local, I mean our freeway, the I-80 corridor. What I don't mean is Oregon or Stockton. I mean, it can be, people can be from Richmond or Oakland. It's not like they have to be Berkeley people, but they have to be from our area, because what we see is contractors bringing in all these workers from Mexico. We have one guy who brings them in and then fires them and sends them home, kind of thing. And that's just not what we want in our city. So. Anything else? Any questions? Yeah, Michael.
Could you talk more about what I asked you earlier about electrification of city buildings and equipment and vehicles?
Yeah. Right now we have been electrifying our buildings. As I mentioned to you, we have 3 senior centers that were rebuilt as care facilities in case of an earthquake. They've all been electrified. We have 3 fire stations are being electrified through EBCE, and they're being given solar and battery backup. They still do not have electric fire trucks that they're satisfied with. So that is just not happening, but they live there, and so as a structure, it's going to be electrified, but the trucks still need gas. I'm trying to think what other buildings have we done. We're doing our corporation yard has been electrified and has solar. That's where all of our vehicles plug in. We had to do that before we could get electric vehicles. So we're at about 19 electric cars right now, and some mid-sized trucks, and a few parking control officer vehicles. The hardest nut is the police department, which I'm like, go drive my Tesla. It's so fun. You're going to go so fast. They're like, what if it runs out of electricity? I'm like, what if you run out of gas? I don't even understand this question. We're a very small city. You don't have to go that far. You're not driving to Oregon in this car. But there's a lot of resistance. It's an old-fashioned kind of like, no, I like my souped-up car. So I think as more vehicles become electric, we'll break through that. But it's been a really big hassle because they have a lot of our vehicles. So, yeah. Thank you very much.